After his loss, Fischer made further demands on the organizers, including that all cameras be removed. When they were not, he refused to appear for Game 2, giving Spassky a default win. His appeal was rejected. With the score now 2-0 in Spassky's favor, many observers believed that the match was over and Fischer would leave Iceland. Fischer decided to stay in Iceland and Spassky agreed to play the third game in a small room backstage, out of sight of the spectators. Let's see the game. d4. White opens with the queen's pawn, aiming for central control, while black responds, knight f6, developing the knight to a central square and preparing to support the center. c4. White continues to advance the pawn in the center, establishing a strong pawn duo, while black supports the d5 square with e6 and prepares to develop the bishop. Knight f3 continues to develop pieces, preparing to control the center further. Black counterattacks in the center with c5, striking at white's pawn on d4. d5. White opts to push pawns on d5, while black captures d5 with the pawn, opening lines for piece development. c4 pawn takes on d5. White's central pawn captures creates an isolated pawn on d5, while black pushes d6 pawn. Knight c3 develops the knight to a natural square, preparing to castle kingside. Black pushes g6, preparing to fianchettos the kingside bishop, aiming for control of the long diagonal. Knight d2 reroutes the knight to a more active square, potentially aiming to control the e4 square or support the c4 pawn. Fischer continues development, knight d7, bringing the knight towards the center. e4. Spassky advances the e-pawn, aiming to strengthen the center and gain space, while Fischer continues developing bishop g7, placing the bishop on a strong diagonal and preparing to castle kingside. Bishop e2. White completes development of the light-squared bishop, preparing to castle kingside, while black castles. Spassky castles kingside, completing development, while Fischer prepares to pressure the e4 pawn with the rook on e8. Queen to c2. White centralizes the queen, eyeing both the d5 and e4 squares, and knight h5. This move was a stunning surprise, deviating from typical Benoni plans. Fischer aims to provoke weaknesses in White's kingside pawn structure. Fischer seeks to create counterplay against White's position, particularly exploiting the weakened white squares around Spassky's king, which we will see shortly. Bishop takes h5. Spassky sacrifices the bishop for the knight to open the g-file and create potential attacking chances against the Fischer king. Black recaptures on h5, accepting potential weaknesses on the king side. Knight to c4, preparing to remaneuver the knight to help on king side. Knight e4, black aims relieve pressure on the king side. Knight e3, eyeing central squares and preparing to defend the king side, while Fischer activates the queen on h4, putting pressure on the h2 pawn and preparing potential threats against the white king. Bishop d2 reinforces the defense of the e3 knight and prepares to potentially challenge the black queen on h4, while Fischer moves knight to g4 increases pressure. Knight takes g4. White exchanges knights to relieve pressure on the king side, and black recaptures with h-pawn. Bishop f4 centralizes the bishop, aiming to control key squares and potentially attack black queen, and Fischer repositions the queen on f6. g3. White limiting black's potential pawn breaks, but it also weakens the light squares around white's king, which later becomes a target for Fischer's pieces. And Fischer completes development, placing the bishop on a more active square d7, improving his scope in both sides of board. a4. White starts to expand on the queen side, potentially creating pawn breaks and gaining space. b6 by black, strengthen the queen side and potentially challenge the white pawn structure with b5. Rook e1. White continues to improve piece placement, reinforcing the e4 pawn, while a6 black reinforces the b5 pawn and prepares to challenge the white pawn structure. Rook to e2, potentially doubling rooks, supporting the advance of the e-pawn or creating threats along the e-file. b5. Fischer advances on the queen side, challenging the white pawn structure and creating potential pawn breaks. Rook slides to e1. White doubles rooks on the e-file, increasing pressure on the black position, while black repositions the queen in g6, aiming to create threats and control weak light squares. b3. Spassky defends the b2 pawn, but this creates potentially a long-term weakness. Rook e7, preparing to challenge the white pieces along the e-file. Queen d3. White's queen reroutes to d3, adding pressure on b-pawn, while Fischer slides the rook to the b-file to challenge the white queen along the b-file or support a queenside pawn break. Pawn takes on b5. Fischer recaptures with pawn. White initiates pawn exchanges on the queen side. b4, c4. Both players push their pawns attempting gain space. Queen to d2. Rook doubles up on e-file. Rook to e3, h5. Black advances the h-pawn supporting a kingside attack. Rook e2, king h7. Rook e3, king g8. Rook e2. After these repetitive movements, Fischer decided to capture the knight on c3, remove a defender on a4, disrupting the white position. Queen takes the bishop on c3. Rook takes pawn on e4, winning a pawn and prompting exchange. Now we just have a trade of rooks, ending in a queen endgame. Rook takes, and queen takes. Bishop h6 threatening mate. Spassky attempts to create threats against Fischer's king, but this move overlooks Fischer's strong counterplay. Fischer calmly defends against the threats while simultaneously continuing his own attack. Bishop retreat to c1, and queen on b1 pin bishop and put pressure on b4 pawn. King f1, bishop f5. Fischer bring bishop into the game, dominating weak light squares in white territory. King e2, queen e4 check. Queen e3 block the check. Queen c2 check again. Queen d2 block check again. Queen b3 threatening b4 pawn. Queen d4, Spassky's last-ditch effort to create complications and counterplay, but Fischer accurately calculates the tactics and finds the winning move, bishop d3+, forcing resignation due to the impending loss of material. Overall, Fischer's 11th move, knight h5, and subsequent kingside attack caught Spassky off guard, leading to a strategically rich game where Fischer demonstrated his superior understanding of dynamic imbalances and tactical nuances. Spassky's passive responses and inaccuracies allowed Fischer to seize the initiative and eventually secure the victory. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are a fan of chess, please like and subscribe.